Bill Trebelov stood frozen and helpless as he watched his beloved wife cling warmly to their next-door neighbor, Roger. Emily smiled so radiantly that she seemed to glow from within. She wore a light yellow dress that left little to the imagination. Her slender body fit perfectly into Roger's arms, as if they were two pieces of a puzzle. They laughed, surrounded by friends and neighbors with familiar but strangely indistinguishable faces. Roger whispered something in Emily's ear, and it made her giggle like a little girl. She playfully slapped him on the shoulder and then stood on her tiptoes to kiss him. Bill opened his mouth to scream, but couldn't say a word. He struggled to breathe. It seemed to him that he was underwater. He began to panic and felt his chest tighten and his pulse quicken. Roger looked him straight in the eye and acknowledged his presence with a wicked smile. He winked and kissed Emily again, right there, in front of all their friends and neighbors. This time, when he kissed her, his tongue protruded grotesquely from his mouth, and his hands boldly explored her body. He lifted the hem of Emily's dress, exposing her bare buttocks to the warm summer air, and squeezed her firm ass with his well-groomed hands. She responded with playful coos and returned his kiss with wanton lust. Roger broke their kiss and looked back at Bill. This time his smile turned into laughter. He pointed his finger at Bill, and all heads turned to follow his direction. The surrounding audience burst into raucous laughter. Some laughed so hard they spilled their drinks. Even Emily couldn't hide her laughter behind her graceful hand. Bill followed the crowd's gaze and lowered his head. He was naked, completely naked. He walked up wild-eyed and gasping for air. He turned to the table next to the bed, and at that very moment the alarm clock rang. He turned it off and turned to the other side of the bed. Like every morning for the last 3 years, he was exhausted and sleep-deprived. At first, Emily thought it was just the flu. She started vomiting and could not swallow any food or liquid. Then constipation set in, and this led to bloating and unbearable abdominal pain. When Bill found her curled up in the fetal position on their bathroom floor one evening, that's when he finally insisted she go to the emergency room and have someone check her. When the doctors ordered an ultrasound, the first thought that came to Bill's mind was that she was pregnant. "I don't want another child," he thought. "We finally kicked the other two out of the house. I'm too old to start all over again." In the years to come, he would spend countless lonely nights brooding over the selfishness of that thought and berating himself for having even thought of it. "There is no reason to panic," the doctor assured them, but the expression on his face said otherwise. The doctor described a suspicious area on Emily's ovaries and explained that a laparoscopy would be needed to get a better look at the area. Although his insides clenched with worry, Bill maintained a calm demeanor and insisted that there was no reason to worry. "We'll get through this," he assured her, gently stroking her arm as she waited to be wheeled away for the procedure. "Whatever happens to us, we will get through it. Remember when Janie got sick? We thought we would lose her forever. But that did not happen. We went through this together. Remember when we first got married? We lived in this shitty little apartment in this rundown neighborhood?" Emily smiled bravely at him. "We didn't have a penny. And then I made it even worse by getting pregnant." "Yeah, well, I guess I had something to do with it too," he replied with a smile. "And you were worried that we wouldn't have enough money to raise the child. But I told you that everything would be fine. I told you I take classes in the evenings, and I will make enough money so that you don't have to work and you can stay home and raise our child. Eventually, I would make enough money that we could move to a nicer place." "And we did it," she said, squeezing his hand and looking at him with sparkling eyes. "You worked so hard and provided for our family so well. I couldn't have asked for a better husband and father to our children. Well, don't talk like it's all over. We still have a lot to do." "I'm scared, Bill. I'm scared too, Em. But we will get through this. I promise." As Emily lay in the recovery room after her procedure, her doctor walked into the waiting room with the same serious expression Bill had seen earlier. "A tumor was found," the doctor explained, "and a sample was taken. The results would be known soon, and there was still hope that it was benign. However, given her symptoms," the doctor added bluntly, "you should prepare for the worst. Bill wandered down the corridor. The floor barely felt under his feet, and the walls became foggy and colorless. Emotions overwhelmed him so suddenly that he was not prepared for it. He quickly turned into the nearest toilet, entered the stall farthest from the entrance, locked the door, and collapsed on the floor. He was taught to believe that real men don't cry. But for the first time in his adult life, he cried like a child. Ovarian cancer. 4th stage. It seemed like an impossible diagnosis. Cruel joke. Just a few days before she was admitted to the hospital, Emily was as happy and healthy as ever. How could the disease develop so much in such a short period of time? Bill refused to accept this diagnosis. He told his wife they would seek a second opinion. If this opinion were the same, then they would be looking for a third and fourth. No matter how many doctors it takes, they will find someone who has the courage to make a more optimistic diagnosis. "Bill, I love you," Emily said, smiling. "But darling, you need to face the truth. This is happening, and there is nothing you or I can do to stop it." "Bullshit," he said. He felt his anger bubble to the surface. "Honey, I'm so sorry I'm putting you through this." He looked at her in amazement. Now she was living through this incomprehensible moment, peering into the dark depths of her own death, and her main concern was him. Over the next few months, he would continue to be amazed at this woman's strength and character. Together, they decided that she would undergo chemotherapy to prolong her life as much as possible. Bill was never a good helper and tried to avoid being around sick people whenever possible. However, with no other choice, he quickly learned and became a first-class nurse. He helped her in and out of bed, took her to the bathroom, and cleaned up the vomit from the bucket she kept by the bed. Towards the end, he learned how to clean her drainage tube and change her IVs. The end came faster than he expected. One evening, they were watching TV. Emily lay in her makeshift hospital bed that Bill had set up in the living room at her request. Suddenly, he felt that something had changed. He looked at her, and she seemed calmer and more peaceful than usual. He hesitantly walked over to her bed and took her hand in his, being careful not to squeeze too hard. She didn't move a single muscle. Fighting back the tears welling in his eyes, he placed a couple of fingers against the main artery in her neck. There was no pulse. Months passed in a gloomy fog. At first, friends and relatives visited him often, but over time these visits became less and less frequent. His children lived out of state, but they called often to check on him. Bill was busy around the house doing things he had neglected while he was taking care of Emily. He found that as long as his mind was occupied, he could not think about her. It wasn't that he didn't want to think about her, but he found that when he did, it incapacitated him for hours. Over time, he learned to control it a little better and focus on the pleasant memories rather than the horror of her final dying weeks. During the day, it was easy to keep his mind busy with work or various projects around the house. At night, he was left alone with his thoughts. Most nights, he just cried himself to sleep. It got to the point where he dreaded going to bed and found himself going to bed later and later and sleeping less and less. It was during one of these sleepless nights, as he lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the black ceiling above his head, that his life, or at least the perception of his life, changed forever. He thought about the email Emily wrote to him years ago. It was sweet and romantic, and it filled his heart with overwhelming joy when he read it. He understood better how much he meant to his wife, and how much she loved him with all her heart. He would give anything to read those words again, he thought. Having gotten rid of the charade of trying to sleep, he got out of bed and walked into his office to turn on his laptop. He scrolled to the bottom of his inbox and confirmed his fears that he had deleted all his old emails. He slammed his fist on the table and sighed. Then a thought occurred to him, and he switched to Emily's email. She wasn't very careful about keeping her email account organized, and it drove him crazy at times because she would often delete emails that he thought she should have saved. But she wasn't computer savvy enough to know that her deleted emails weren't actually deleted until she emptied them from the trash. Sure enough, when he scrolled through the deleted items folder on her account, He found messages from several years earlier. He remembered that the email she sent him was written about 5 years ago, and he went through the messages from that year, one by one. He paused when he discovered a message from their next-door neighbor, Roger. It was entitled, "About Last Night," and dated July 5th. He seemed to remember attending a 4th of July barbecue in the neighborhood that year. In fact, this was the last year that he and Emily went to this annual event. With a curious look on his face, Bill clicked on the email, and it opened. "Hi, Emily. I just want to say that I really enjoyed last night. I've wanted to do this for years. Sorry we were interrupted. If you ever want to finish what we started, you know where I live. Roger. P.S. Don't worry about Phil. I talked to him, and he's not going to tell anyone." "What the hell?" Bill muttered under his breath. What did Roger mean? What did he enjoy doing? What had he wanted to do for years? What did he mean by finishing what they started? And what did Phil have to do with this? Bill had never even considered the remote possibility that Emily had ever cheated on him during any moment of their 25 years together. She was as devoted as any of their acquaintances and friends. Sure, they went through some rough patches like any married couple, but their relationship was rock solid. On the other hand, he remembered that Emily had been drinking heavily that evening. She didn't usually get drunk, but on this particular evening, one of the neighbors brought homemade wine, which Emily thought was wonderful, and she overdid it a little. When she suggested that they make different plans for Independence Day in subsequent years, he assumed that she was embarrassed for being so drunk in front of the neighbors. But perhaps there was another reason. He quickly searched for a response to this email or any other emails from Roger, but found nothing. He closed his email program, and his desktop wallpaper showed the smiling face of his beautiful wife on her 30th birthday. He stared at the photograph from a new perspective. Was it possible that she was not as loving and faithful a wife as he believed her to be? That night, a recurring nightmare began. The next morning, Bill stood at the window of his house, sipping coffee. He looked across the street at the house where Roger and Chelsea lived with their 2 children. Their house was the largest in the area, and the lawn in front of it was immaculately manicured. The black Lexus, sparkling clean as always, was parked in the driveway. Bill never liked Roger, from the very first day he moved to the area. Roger was a trial lawyer in Philadelphia, and apparently a very successful one. He was the kind of guy who pretended to be humble, but at the same time took every opportunity to let you know that he was better than you in every way. He was more handsome, fitter, made more money, took better vacations, owned a nicer house and a nicer car, and married a more beautiful woman. His wife Chelsea was a typical trophy wife. She was several years younger, with long blonde hair, huge breasts, and a fake tan. Almost everyone in the neighborhood suspected that Roger was constantly cheating on her, but she was too stupid to understand it. Their children were terribly spoiled and given everything they ever wanted. The plan was to sip coffee and wait for Roger to leave the house. Bill will show him the email and, if his suspicions are correct, knock out some of this asshole's pearly whites. However, as he took a sip of his coffee, the holes in the plan became apparent. Roger would simply deny any wrongdoing. The email was vague enough that it could be interpreted in any number of ways, and he was skilled enough with words to spin it any way he wanted. Even if he confessed and Bill knocked him out, Roger would sue him in a heartbeat, and that idiot would own his house. Bill downed the rest of his coffee just as Roger walked out of his front door, dressed in an expensive suit. He strutted over to his Lexus, got behind the wheel, and backed out of the driveway. Bill watched the car speed down the road and noticed another neighbor, Phil, standing in his yard, watering his plants. "This is an opportunity," Bill muttered under his breath. Adrenaline rushed through his veins as he quickly walked towards Phil's house. Phil turned around just as Bill reached his driveway, smiled, and waved. However, his smile disappeared when he noticed Bill's expression. "Is everything all right, Bill?" asked Phil. "No, not really," Bill answered. "I have a question for you." "Well, okay," Phil said hesitantly. "Ask. Why didn't you tell me that Roger had my wife?" All the blood drained from Phil's face, and his jaw dropped. He took a step back and nearly tripped over a hedge. What? How? Damn, Bill. I didn't want to cause any problems, that's all. When did you find out about this? Just now, Bill said. Oh, shit, Phil said, lowering his head. I'm sorry, Bill. Why don't you tell me what happened? Bill asked. The rage inside him made his muscles tremble. Look, Bill, it was a long time ago, and Emily, she's gone now. There is no need to dig. Bill took a step towards Phil. His eyes pierced right through him, and he looked into his face furiously, clenching his fists. Tell me what happened, right now. Okay, Phil said, raising his hands in defense. But I really think you're making a mistake by digging into this. Bill stood still and waited patiently as Phil took a deep breath and fidgeted nervously. He looked like he was about to throw up. It was at a 4th of July party a few years ago, he began. Do you remember what it was in that house at the other end of the block? Well, I didn't want to walk all that way, so I went there. Later that night, I went out to get some things from my car, and that's when I saw some movement in Roger's car. What did you see, Phil? At first, I wasn't sure, but as I got closer, I also heard some noise. I looked out the back window, and that's when I saw them. Roger and Emily. What were they doing, Phil? Bill asked. The veins on his forehead were bulging and his eyes were burning. Come on, dude. You know what they did? I'm not going to spell it out. I need to hear the words, Phil. They had sex, Phil said too loudly. He looked around quickly and then spoke more quietly. She was kind of lying in the back seat and he was on top, you know. Bill's hands involuntarily clenched into fists again, and he felt an irresistible urge to hit the nearest object. Phil must have read his mind. Hey, man, you asked for it, he said, still raising his hands. I didn't want to tell you. Yes, you are a real friend. Bill spat. You hid this from me for 5 years. I didn't think it would benefit anyone. It's not my place to interfere. I know Roger chatted to you a little after that. Let me guess. He offered you free services from his law office in exchange for your silence. Oh my God, Bill, who do you take me for? You know what, Phil? Bill said, retreating. I don't know. I don't know what kind of person you are anymore. Emily knelt down and ran her hands down the front of Roger's khaki shorts. She unzipped his fly and reached inside, removing his manly tool. She smiled and cooed. She purred. Is that all for me? She began to work on his male instrument, giving caresses. While Emily continued to please him, Roger raised the imported beer in Bill's direction and nodded. The other neighbors turned to face him, all with the same sly grins. The nightmares always ended the same way. All the neighbors laughed and pointed at Bill as he stood naked and frozen in place. How many neighbors were privy to this secret? How many of them laughed at him behind his back, just like they did in his dreams? Everything he thought he knew about his wife and his marriage was a lie. She was nothing more than a dirty, cheating slut, and their marriage was a complete sham. That juicy letter she wrote to him, which he had cherished all these years, was simply an admission of guilt. How could she love him so much and value their marriage so much when she could spread her legs for a fucking asshole like Roger? How many others has she done this for? Bill stared at the house across the street with its perfect lawn. Of course, Roger had nothing to do with the state of this lawn. He hired someone to trim it and fertilize it. This man has never done a single hard job in his entire life. How righteous would it be to go there right now and dump a bunch of rock salt on that lawn? Maybe write the word scam in huge letters so everyone in the neighborhood knows who this sack of crap really is. White-hot rage flared within him. He grabbed the nearest object, symbolically a frame with a photograph of Emily, and threw it at the wall, breaking it into pieces. He looked around the room for anything else to throw and was disgusted when he saw pictures and reminders of Emily everywhere. He went down to the basement and emerged with a large container, which he filled with all the objects he found that reminded him of her. He stuffed the container into the closet and slammed the door. Breathing heavily, he sank into his favorite deep chair and opened a bottle of beer. Revenge replaced grief as his new consuming obsession. Roger simply could not be allowed to get away with what he did. He deserved his punishment, and Bill would be the one to inflict it. Roger needed to know what it was like to be humiliated. He needs to get over the loss, like Bill did. He deserved to lose his wife, his home, his children, and his beloved car. Everything that mattered to him had to be wrested from him. It took Bill several days to come up with a plan. It took several more to find the right woman to carry out this plan. Once he found her, he met her at a cafe to make sure she fit the bill and that she was willing and able to follow orders. Money was no object, and he paid her generously. After days of planning, the day of reckoning finally arrived. With his heart pounding, Bill knocked on the door of the house across the street. Chelsea responded, looking puzzled. "What happened, Bill?" she asked sweetly. "It's okay," Bill said, "but I need you to come with me. I need to show you something." "What's the matter?" she asked, looking worried. "This is something very important to you," he explained. "That's all I can say right now. Just come with me, please." She continued to question him as they drove the short distance to the country club, but Bill was adamant in his refusal to answer her questions. He almost felt sorry for her. However, she deserved to know the truth just as much as he did. He pulled into the parking lot of a country club, and Chelsea suddenly panicked. "Why are we here?" she asked. "Is there something wrong with Roger? Do you know he's playing golf here today?" "Yes, I know," Bill answered calmly. He looked at the time on the dashboard. "Follow me," he said, getting out of the car. He led her on foot around the country club and down a short path through a wooded area to a neighboring property. It was empty except for one lone car parked at the far end. "It looks like our Lexus," Chelsea said. "Why is it parked over there?" "Let's see," Bill said, trying his best to suppress a smile. As they approached the car, Bill slowed his pace, allowing Chelsea to walk ahead of him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone, clicking it to switch to camera and then clicking it again to switch to video mode. What was about to happen would be so beautiful that he knew he would want to relive this moment over and over again. Chelsea approached the car cautiously. When she got close enough to see what was going on in the back seat, she gasped loudly and covered her mouth with her hands. She froze in place for a moment. She then rushed to the back door handle and forced it open. "You fucking son of a bitch!" she screamed. She leaned into the back seat and slammed her fists into Roger's torso as he raised his hands in defense. She continued screaming and punching, and then grabbed an armful of clothes from the back seat. She slammed the door with her foot. Her face was stained with leaked makeup, and her usually perfect hair was a mess. Roger appeared on the other side of the car and took a sneaky look around before ducking around the back of the car. "Give me my clothes!" he shouted to his wife. He was completely naked, and his hands covered his private parts. "Fuck you!" Chelsea shouted and ran to the front of the car, still holding her clothes. "I'm not kidding, Chelsea!" he shouted. "Give me my fucking clothes!" "Fuck you!" she shouted again. He chased her around the car for 2 laps, while the scantily clad woman in the back seat quietly slipped out and ran up to Bill. Roger stopped on the passenger side of the car, and Chelsea looked over the roof at him. "Chelsea, please give me my clothes," Roger said in a calm voice, "and we can talk about this." In one swift motion, she opened the door, tossed her clothes inside, and slid behind the wheel. She locked the doors before Roger could grab the handle. She looked at her husband with mascara smeared on his cheeks, raised her middle finger in the air and drove off, tires squealing along the road. Roger stood in the middle of the parking lot with a dumbfounded expression on his face. "Chelsea, you fucking bitch! Come back here!" he shouted in a shrill voice and jumped up and down, still covering his genitals with one hand. For the first time, Roger seemed to notice Bill. It took him a moment to realize who it was, and another moment to realize that he was being recorded. "Bill, what the hell are you doing here?" he shouted. "Turn off the damn camera. Actually, just give me the phone." He held out his hand as if he were a school teacher demanding that her students spit out the gum. "Fuck you!" You're fucking crazy if you think I'm going to give you my phone, Bill laughed. Give me that damn phone, Roger screamed in the same shrill tone. He took a few steps towards Bill. I'm telling you right now, Bill said, pressing a button on his phone and putting it in his pocket. If you take another step towards me, I'll knock the hell out of you. Roger stopped dead in his tracks. He looked past Bill to the woman hiding behind him. He seemed overcome with panic and confusion, and his eyes filled with tears. Why? Asked Roger. You bastard know damn well why, Bill replied. Come on, honey. He took the woman's hand and led her back to the main parking lot. Roger froze in place and stared into the distance. Here's the other half, Bill said, handing the woman a thick envelope as they approached his car. As agreed. Thank you, she said. I have to say that it was a lot easier than I thought. You mean to seduce him? Yes, she said, adjusting her top. Do not get me wrong. I've never had problems picking men. Well, you're his type, Bill said matter-of-factly. And how do you know this? She asked playfully. Bill turned to her. You are very similar to my wife. Oh, she answered quietly. I'm guessing you also knew that he wouldn't hesitate to have sex in his car, right? He's a predictable guy, Bill said with a chuckle. He seems to have an unhealthy fetish for this car. So, I think everything went as you expected. Better. Much better than I ever could have expected. Thank you. They drove in silence for some time. She smiled. Okay, but how did you know that he would cheat on his wife? Another easy question, he answered. Once a cheater, always a cheater. When Bill got home, he opened a beer and watched the video on his phone over and over again, laughing until his stomach hurt. A fluffy red cat purred at his feet. Felix, he said, scratching the cat behind the ears. I haven't laughed so hard in ages. If only he could share this video with the world, he thought. He took another sip of his beer and nearly choked on it in realization. Felix, he said with a big smile, we're not done making that asshole pay for what he did. He ran up the stairs and headed straight to his office. He turned on the laptop and connected his phone. He created a YouTube account, and within minutes, his video was uploaded for everyone to see. He laughed uncontrollably as he captioned it with the headline, Wife Catch Husband Cheating, Fun Guaranteed. Incredibly, the video went viral within a week, receiving more than 400,000 views. A week later, views exceeded 2 million. Bill's Facebook friends shared the video, unaware that Bill was the one who uploaded it. When a popular television show aired it, the video went mega viral, exceeding over 100 million views. News vans began appearing across the street from Bill's house. Reporters showed up at Bill's door, asking about the whereabouts of his neighbors. People began creating parody videos, making fun of Roger's high-pitched voice and setting it to music. One of these videos also went viral, further increasing views. Roger was forced to resign from his law firm. He became too notorious and recognizable for juries to take seriously. Soon after, Chelsea filed for divorce. She ended up with a house, children, and, in a delightfully righteous twist, a car. Rumors circulated around the area that she smashed the car with a sledgehammer and then sold it for scrap. Bill watched the whole thing with stunned detachment. Justice prevailed, and he did not regret what he had done. In his opinion, now he and Roger were even, and yet he felt a cold and bitter emptiness inside him. He wasn't sure why he still felt this way until he heard a knock on the door. It was a cold winter day, and he had just added a log to the fire when he heard an unexpected visitor at his door. When he opened the door, he was shocked to see Marilyn standing there. She was Emily's best friend. They had been friends since elementary school. He hasn't seen her since the funeral. Marilyn, he said, standing in the doorway with a confused look. What are you doing here? Hi, Bill, she said with an awkward smile. Can I come in? Of course, he said. They shared an awkward moment of hesitation and then hugged each other. He led her to the chairs in front of the fireplace. Can I get you something to drink? No, thank you, she said. I won't stay long. He stared into her eyes, puzzled. "What can I do for you?" "Well," she said, "I saw the video on the internet." She pointed towards Roger's old house across the street. "I'm almost sure the whole world saw this video." Bill laughed. "I have a feeling that you published it," she said. "Really?" he asked. "What?" "I just have a feeling, that's all," she interrupted. "I talked to Phil." She let the words sink in and looked at him meaningfully. Bill shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "So what?" he asked. The expression on his face was stone cold. "He told me that, you know," she continued. "And I'm here because I made a promise to Emily. I made this promise just before she died. She told me that if you ever find out what happened, to give it to you." Bill watched intently as Marilyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. On it, in Emily's handwriting, was written one word, Bill. Marilyn handed it to him and he stared at it impassively. Several moments passed and neither of them moved a muscle. All that could be heard was the crackling of the fireplace and the ticking of the clock. Without warning, Bill snatched the envelope from Marilyn's hands and threw it into the fire. Marilyn rushed to the fireplace and tried to pull it out, but Bill grabbed her hand. "What did you do?" she screamed, eyes wide and mouth agape. "Now we're even," he said calmly. "Your dying wife wrote you this letter," she said. "How could you just throw it away like that? What do you mean you're even?" "I never had the opportunity to confront her," he stated in the same calm tone, "and now she'll never have the chance to explain." But you have to hear her side of the story." "Damn her fucking version of this story," he shouted, causing Marilyn to recoil. What could she say to explain herself? "I'm really sorry. Isn't it what you think? It didn't mean anything to me? Was it just a mistake? Was it just sex? Was I drunk? Yeah, well, that's it." Marilyn sat in silence for a minute, stunned. She stared at him as he paced around the room. "She never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. "You were the love of her life. You know it." "I don't know anything else," he shouted. "It was all a lie. Our whole marriage was a lie." "No, it wasn't like that," Marilyn screamed, jumping to her feet. "She loved you, damn it. And yes, it was a mistake." "People make mistakes, Bill. She drank too much, was not thinking well, and made a mistake. This one mistake doesn't mean your entire marriage was a sham, and it doesn't mean she never loved you." "Yes. Well, for me it is." Marilyn stared at him, but he refused to look at her. She looked around the room and saw empty shelves and tables where family photographs had once stood. She shook her head and sighed. "Bill, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen." Finally, he looked at her. His eyes filled with tears and he swallowed hard. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It's not about the person who harmed you, it's about you. It's not about letting someone off the hook. It's about allowing yourself the freedom to put your past behind you and move on with your life. He stood silent and motionless. She quietly walked up to him and hugged him, holding him tightly to her. She then headed to the door and left. It was spring when Bill heard a knock on his door again. Marilyn stood on the porch, smiling curiously. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked, pointing to a truck loaded with items in the driveway. A sign on the front lawn said the house had been sold. "I'm just collecting the last of my things," Bill said with a smile. "Come in." "Looks like I caught you just in time," she remarked, pointing to the almost empty house. "I just happened to be in the neighborhood, saw the sign and the loaded truck, and put two and two together." "You should have been a detective," he teased. She responded with a smile. "I'm loading things up and these are the latest." "Do you need any help?" she suggested. "No, but thank you. I think I can handle this." "So, where are you going?" "Florida," he said. "It's time to get away from the cold. There is a pensioners' commune where the ratio of women to men is almost 2-to-1. I like these odds." He gave her a devilish grin. She looked around the room and stopped when she noticed a photograph on the end table. It showed Bill and Emily smiling happily and looking healthy and young. "Well, I'm glad to see you've moved on," she said with a smile. "I'm happy for you." Thank you, Marilyn. I decided to follow the advice of my good old friend. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.